Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't explain. It doesn't chase validation or argue for attention. It walks in silence, moves with clarity, and leaves impact without permission. That's the essence of Stoic self-respect, not in how loud you speak, but in how little you need to. Most people confuse volume with authority. They think speaking more proves confidence. But the Stoics knew the opposite is true. Marcus Aurelius led an empire, wrote entire books to himself, and spoke less than those begging for recognition. Because respect isn't something you demand, it's something you radiate. And it begins with restraint. The man who controls his mouth controls his mind. And the man who controls his mind, he controls outcomes. This video is about that kind of power, the kind that builds silently. This isn't charisma, it's command. Not the kind that needs the room to agree, but the kind that holds its ground, even when no one claps. Speak less, rule more. But first, learn why silence is your sharpest weapon. First principle of silent power. If you can't control your mouth, you can't control your life. Every time you speak from impulse, to defend, to prove, to dominate, you're spending energy that could have built your presence. The Stoics saw speech as a weapon, not decoration. Epictetus said, "Let silence be your general rule, or say only what is necessary and in few words." Because unnecessary words weaken necessary actions. Think about it. Who do you respect more? The man who speaks endlessly to fill silence, or the one who holds silence and makes every word land like a hammer? A man who respects himself doesn't chase reactions. He doesn't explain what doesn't need explanation. He doesn't try to win every conversation, because he's already won over himself. When you speak less, your energy tightens. Your presence sharpens. People lean in when you finally speak, not because you raised your voice, but because you didn't throw it around like currency. That's not mystery. That's mastery. Second principle of silent power. Mental clarity begins with verbal discipline. The more you talk, the less space you leave to hear your own thoughts. That's not just a communication problem, it's a focus problem. Most people speak just to fill the air, not to deliver value. They say things they don't mean, over-explain, interrupt, and repeat themselves, not because they're confident, but because they're noisy inside. The Stoics practiced silence as a filter, not to isolate, but to purify. When you stop talking, you start noticing patterns, people, weaknesses, opportunities. Most importantly, yourself. Silence slows your mind down to its true rhythm. It clears emotional fog. It reveals what matters. And in that stillness, you make better moves. Not because you're smarter, but because you're less reactive. The warrior doesn't just speak with intention, he thinks with intention. And that clarity starts by removing the constant need to respond. The world wants your reaction. Give it your stillness instead. That's how you shift from noise to power. Third principle of silent self-respect. Silence is not absence, it's presence under control. Weak men stay silent because they fear conflict. Strong men stay silent because they've mastered the moment. There's a difference. One shrinks, the other waits. Stoic silence doesn't mean avoidance. It means restraint. Deliberate, grounded, and dangerous in its calm. It means you don't interrupt. You don't rush to correct. You don't react just to assert yourself. Why? Because you don't need the noise to prove the weight of your presence. Real authority doesn't seek validation. It controls tempo. And silence slows everything down until you decide what's worth responding to. The more you speak, the more you reveal. But when you stay silent, people reveal themselves, their motives, their weaknesses, their rhythm. And when you finally speak, you're not reacting, You're redirecting. That's not passivity. That's dominance with discipline. A man who respects himself doesn't need to be heard constantly. His silence already commands the room. And his restraint? That's the sharpest sign he's not to be underestimated. If you're training your mind like a warrior, hit subscribe. No hype, just discipline. Fourth principle of silent mastery. Build daily silence into your routine, not as a break, but as a drill. Most people treat silence like something that just happens. A moment between tasks, a pause when no one's around. But for the Stoic, silence is a daily ritual, a place to return to, a muscle to sharpen. Seneca used time and silence to refine his thoughts before speaking. Marcus Aurelius journaled before sunrise, not for inspiration, but for correction. You do the same. Start your day with 15 minutes of intentional silence. No phone, no music, no noise, just breath and thought. Sit in it, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then, because silence is where your real mental state surfaces. That's where you hear the chaos before it becomes a reaction. That's where you slow the emotion before it becomes an outburst. That's where you remember who you are before the world tries to decide it for you. Warriors train with swords, thinkers train with silence, and men who respect themselves never let a day pass without time to hear their own mind, undisturbed. Fifth principle of silent self-respect. Choose silence over reaction, especially when your ego is screaming. Anyone can stay quiet when they're calm, but real power shows up when you have every reason to speak and still choose not to. The insult comes, the misunderstanding lands, the provocation rises, and yet, you hold. Not because you're weak, but because your self-worth doesn't hang on proving a point. The Stoics taught that self-respect means mastering yourself before correcting anyone else. You don't need to clap back. You don't need to explain your value. You just need to remain unshaken. When you hold that line, something shifts, not just in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. You become someone who no longer leaks power through reaction. You contain it, you direct it, and when the time comes to speak, you speak with force, not volume, with truth, not ego. So now ask yourself, when was the last time you stayed silent? Not out of fear, but out of power. Not to hide, but to lead. If you've never used silence as a form of power, it's not because you're incapable, it's because you've never been trained. You've been conditioned to defend, explain, fill the space, to prove your point, to speak before thinking. But that ends here, because now you know what silence actually is. It's not passivity, it's presence. Not hiding, but holding. And when you begin to speak less, something powerful happens. People listen differently. You listen differently. Your energy shifts. Your words gain weight. Your moves feel deliberate. And that changes everything. You no longer get pulled into meaningless debates. You don't waste breath on explaining your boundaries. You become the boundary. And that's where self-respect is born. Not from how much you say, but from how well you withhold. Silence becomes your filter. Not everyone gets a reaction. Not every moment deserves your voice. You don't need to talk to be felt. Your silence becomes your statement. Your stillness becomes your shield. You don't need to be louder to be stronger. You don't need to dominate the room to command it. What you need is control over your tongue, over your thoughts, over your energy. That's where true self-respect begins. Not in how others treat you, but in how little you allow the world to pull you out of your frame. The Stoics didn't chase influence, they embodied it. Through silence, through presence, through disciplined restraint. That's what speak less, rule more means. Not that you disappear, but that you become so aligned with your values, so clear in your intent, that noise becomes irrelevant. Drama doesn't stick. Ego doesn't lead. And reactions? They don't earn your energy. This is power. Quiet, steady, undeniable. If you want that kind of mind, start today. Cut the noise. Speak only when it counts. Let your stillness speak louder than your voice. Because real kings don't shout. They don't have to.